Good afternoon. This is Holly Champion. I'm the Artistic Director of Stream Shakespeare, and I've got some wonderful women with me here today, and we're talking about women and Shakespeare and performance. And with me, I've got Charlotte Wiltshire, who's been our technical director on a number of our shows. I've got Shelley Casey, who is Artistic Director, I believe, of She Shakespeare. We've got Camille Tovey, who's been our marketing director for some time now. We've got Amber Spooner, who's been in quite a few of our shows, and also Barbara Hastings, who's been in a number of our shows as well. And we're going to talk about a bunch of things to do with being female, being cast female or cast male in shows, talking about Shakespeare's attitudes towards women and attitudes towards women and being a woman in today's performance space. We were just starting to talk before, and everyone was getting a bit fired up about ageism, so which is really interesting because it's like an intersectional feminist issue. So I think, Camille, you were saying that you're feeling like even as a middle-aged woman, you're starting to get pushback from other women about
really superficial, silly stuff like makeup and clothing. Like I was saying the other day, I was wearing this really funky outfit where it's overall top, and then it's a tulle skirt all in black, and I was wearing a really brightly colored shirt, and I had a woman stop me and sort of, complimented my outfit, and then in a very backhanded way suggested that I should not be wearing it given my age, because she had asked me my age. It's like, how old are you anyway? Well, I'm 50. And told me that I should not be wearing that at this age. And I'm rarely at a loss for words, but that was one of those times where it really hit me that all of a sudden I'm supposed to, just because I've hit this magic number of 50, I'm supposed to suddenly moderate my clothing choices in order to make other people who are either my age or older feel comfortable with their clothing choices. I just didn't understand it.
We're supposed to be invisible, Camille. Did you not know this? Us over 50s?
Do you feel that that's a particular issue in theatre, or is it more in film?
I find it all over the place on everything. It's sort of like I don't know if you guys have seen the Amy Schumer, Tina Fey sketch, the last a bull day. I don't know how you're going to keep this, but it is true. It's once you've been declared past the age of childbearing, that's it. You lose all your sex appeal. There's no more roles for you, or there are very few roles, and they want to give it to people who have already built a name for themselves by this stage. And it's even in Shakespeare, we see there's a couple of roles for women in our age group, but I mean, given that longevity was not as great as it is now in Shakespeare, there's very, very little. There's much, much more opportunity for men of the same age. And what's wonderful, though, and I think, Camille, you and I could attest to this, is being able to play the male roles as a female. And that's a pleasure. At this age.
More common now that we're casting females in male roles, particularly in Shakespeare.
Yeah, and I guess just as well, like sort of on Shakespeare, when you do look at those older women roles, they become sort of more eccentric people, and they are often sort of used as like sort of comic relief. They're not sort of serious, like sort of complex roles. And I was reading an article about, I think it might have been Judi Dench, where she got to a point where she just stopped doing Shakespeare because as she got older, the roles really dried up for her, and she, I guess, sort of didn't see the value in sort of going back and playing those roles where she wasn't going to be sort of challenged as an actor even past the age of 50, I guess.
I mean, a good example of that is Mistress Quickly from Henry IV, which we just did, where he's very, very much caricature. She's a joke throughout the whole thing. Like even the way she talks is a joke. Which is unfortunate because she does to a certain extent drive the narrative, or could drive the narrative. Were she a little bit more of a serious character in terms of Falstaff and sort of his arc.
I feel like that is very much associated with classism as well.
Yeah.
And a lot of the sort of lower class characters in Shakespearean plays are figures of fun a lot of the time, male or female. But yeah, definitely the fact that she's female and lower class and kind of uneducated, she's definitely way more ridiculed by the writing than most other characters. But Barbara, you did play a character in Titus Andronicus who was really an older woman who was really interesting and sexual and complex. And that must have been enjoyable.
Oh God, I loved it. Yeah, she was wonderful to play. But I mean, by the book, I'm really older than anybody would cast her. I was just delighted to have the opportunity to play her. But if you look at the text, she's younger than that, you know? So I'm kind of like, well, at least that was my impression. But oh my God, I had so much fun. And she, you know, she was the bad guy. She was absolutely bad guy. So I fully appreciate what Camille's saying about blame. Like the nurse in Romeo and Juliet, that would be another role in this age group. And she gets the blame. She made the wrong choices. She was weak. She was, you know, all those things. She caused death. So, but man, I'm not going to say no to playing an evil character. I'm not going to say no to playing anything in Shakespeare at this stage, really. Hadst thou in person never offended me, even for his sake I am pitiless. Remember, boys, I poured forth tears in vain to save your brother from the sacrifice. But fierce Andronicus would not relent. Therefore away with her and use her as you will. The worse to her, the better love to me.
I think with Tamora, though, you could understand why she was the way she was. Like she wasn't pure evil. She was really wronged, and she was taking her revenge.
And that's the key to playing any evil character, Shakespeare or otherwise, is they have to justify it with something very grounded that is why they take the action that they take. But yeah, that was certainly a highlight for me last year, was playing Tamora. Are we going to do that again, but live? Because I'm all up for that.
Oh, that would be
I don't know. I'd have to dig my spear out again. And the beret.
Ageism, especially for women, it seems to be more of an issue for women than it is for men, but it goes the other way as well. Like Charlotte, you're very young and you're starting out your career and you've done so much already in just a few years, but you must experience the brunt of ageism and sexism combined at some point.
I do. So like a lot of jobs that you apply for, you just apply for them and you just get the same knockback of that you don't have enough experience. But the thing is that no one's giving you the experience to have that experience, if that makes sense. Like you try and apply for a job at like a high-end theatre company and they're like, oh, well, you don't have enough experience. But no one else in a high-end theatre company would, like, you know, get someone as young as me. Like I've done like different work here and there at different theatre companies and, you know, but sometimes it's just really hard because you like, I'm only 20 and I did like my entertainment set 3 while I was doing year 12. So like I was really young then. And like, it's always just been a struggle of like experience and like getting my foot in the door and trying to just be able to like get jobs, because it's really hard at the moment, especially with COVID and whatever, because they're getting the more experienced people back because they can just do the job and get on with it. Like people are not taking the time at the moment to actually train someone or like give them the opportunity to do it. They just go, oh, we'll get the person that's worked in the industry for 50 years and, you know, whatever. That being said, though, I've like working with different groups of like theatre people and whatever. The older people that have been in the industry for like however many years are the best to talk to. Like if you have a break, go and talk to them, like go and make conversation with them and like go and talk to them about like the shows that they've done, because like some of them are just mind-bogglingly cool and I'm like get very excited. But like, you know, just it is hard at the moment, and like especially being so young and also a female, because they're like, yeah, but sometimes it's kind of difficult to sort of navigate your way through like what they want, because most theatre companies are like, oh, the traditional techie roadie sort of like, guy, heavy dudes that go lug stuff in the truck sort of thing, and sort of being like young, small, female. It's kind of a bit tricky to sort of navigate, stuff. And, sometimes it is hard when you sort of have to, say, I can't do this because it's too heavy or whatever, because they sort of go, oh. And I think, Amber, you probably know the same sort of experience from.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sort of very lucky in the sense that I haven't experienced the ageism that you have, just because I sort of got into it. I sort of started to look at professional work when I was a little bit older, and I'd been to university, and I'd sort of had those years to sort of build on those skills. But yeah, definitely in terms of going into the tech industry as a sort of a very sort of slight female, you do kind of feel as though you are kind of constantly overlooked because you are somebody who isn't able to like lift 50 kg into a truck, that sort of thing. But I'm like hopeful that it's sort of changing, in that I definitely think that there's a lot less sexism in the industry than what there was in previous. I think that's improved a lot. So I'm hoping that what's going to happen is that we'll just improve on that trajectory, and then we'll fix up the ageism as well as we go.
Are there any older women in tech that you can look up to as mentors and role models?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of women who I've come into contact who are like a little bit older and have been in the industry for a long time. It's just, I think as well, sometimes like when you're on a gig and you're in a particular department and they're in a different department, it can be hard to sort of find that time to sort of go up to them and be like, hey, like I'm in this situation, can I get some tips, kind of thing. But if you definitely can see an opportunity to do that, then yeah, you definitely should, because I would hope, and I'm definitely very much the same, where I'm happy to give any experience or any knowledge or any support to someone who asks for it, because I know how important it is to have those support networks and to sort of be someone who is there to support everyone that you're working with.
Mm-hmm. As I get older, I find myself wanting to mentor people more and more, which is kind of an interesting feeling because I never really experienced that when I was younger. I think it's probably something to do with also being a teacher in my other life, as a music teacher. But do you find that, Shelley, as running She Shakespeare, do you find that you're mentoring younger women or providing opportunities to women in a way that doesn't happen in the broader industry?
Yeah, I guess the difference with She Shakespeare, from my experience of the 3 productions we did, was that you'd have an array of women with all different types of experience and from all different age groups. Majority of our cast were younger, and there were people who were fresh out of acting school. But I think the fact that we were in spaces where there wasn't a masculine energy, it allowed for us as women to be a little bit more open to discuss our insecurities and just to discuss where we're feeling our downfalls are, where we're feeling less experienced, or where we're feeling basically our insecurities, and being open and honest about that so that we could help each other through the process of the production.
So do you think that a masculine energy in a production takes the impetus away from people to be honest? Like it stops people from opening up about any insecurities that they have? Have you experienced
100%. In a positive way and a negative way. We had one production where I got a friend who was actually an ex-student of mine, which was super cool. He came in and did all our lighting setting, because someone pulled out at the last minute, and he was just a favour that I pulled in. As soon as he was in the room, it was like go time, mouths were shut, we got on with it, which was awesome. But then it also stopped that opportunity for people to speak up when they were feeling things were moving too fast, or so you know, there's positives and negatives of that masculine energy. I find myself, sorry, that's my dog. Sorry, one second. Here, come here. I find myself as an individual, I am like, I do have a bit of a masculine energy. And I think that that energy coming out in a female form can get misread from both females and males, which I really struggle with. I struggle with, especially, I wish with She Shakespeare, I wish with my experience now of the 3 productions, I could redo the 3 productions, because I learnt a lot, and I learnt a lot from having time away from them because of COVID, reflecting on who I was, how I approach things, my massive imposter syndrome of feeling that I'm not good enough, that I wasn't the right person to be doing it, that I was over my head, that I wasn't supporting these women enough or these people enough in my productions. So massive learning curves for me, and I'm sure massive learning curves for other people as well.
So were you the principal founder of She Shakespeare? And it's only women, or you started including non-binary people as well?
Yeah, so it started off as all women, and then we wanted to open that up to be people who identify as female, and then we really wanted to open up that to different groups and people and minorities in the industry that weren't being overly recognised or supported. So our final production, Romeo and Juliet, had a mixture of female identifying and non-binary actors.
And Camille, you were saying something the other week when we were talking about this before, that you think that it's really interesting that women are cast as men, but men are not cast as women, or something.
Right. It was actually a conversation I had with Hacky about gender flipping. We started out talking about how Pop-Up Globe in New Zealand was going to do an all-male version of Taming of the Shrew, and how that just absolutely backfired and blew up in their face. And so we were sort of discussing about, you know, my feeling was, what if you're going to gender flip, just flip the entire table and open it up to anybody and everybody, regardless of what their gender identities are or how they present, or, you know, what have you. And Hacky was very, very reticent to do that, because he was afraid, or his concern was that he would be viewed as a stunt. It would be viewed as a stunt and not something that was accepted as, you know, choosing the right person for the job. It was done to get a reaction, or it was done to look woke. And so that was his big concern. So, you know, which, you know, you could put a woman in a male role, but you can't put a man in a woman's role because of these concerns of, you know, looking like you're making this into a joke.
Holly, can I jump in on that one? Yeah. I think I put it as a note below, but I'm a drama teacher as well, and I have majority of my 10-year career as a drama teacher to mostly male students. I am all for my male students not just looking at male monologues. I try and get them to look at female monologues as well. And when they look at the female monologue, I like them to think about the possibility of performing it as a female character, but also the possibility of performing it maybe gender fluid, or looking at the qualities. And I think when we look at this idea of gender swapping or gender flipping in a role, is we need to look at the qualities of that character, and when that character is masculine and when that character is feminine. And I think that there is a spectrum, and all characters dance in that spectrum, whether they're cross-dressing, whether they are a mother, whether they're a father, whether they're a hero, and that we need to look at those characteristic qualities in a person rather than it being genderfied.
Yeah, I mean, just to sort of jump in there, sorry. When I was playing Lord Mowbray, who is a male and he's historically a male character, I found it really interesting that I sort of hadn't decided on whether or not I was going to play him as male or if I was going to play him as female. Because the most interesting thing about that character was looking at that sort of insecurity that he had, and also a sort of his desire. Well, I'm going to say he for the purpose of who he was historically. That like it was all about, you know, this sort of avenging his father, and sort of about these sort of insecurities as he sort of navigates his time with the rebels. And that I think it was like halfway through the rehearsal period, like Haki was like, so have you decided if you're going to go female or male? And I was like, oh, I haven't even considered. Like I haven't even thought about it, because it just wasn't sort of important enough to me to sort of be like hard and fast about whether or not he was male or female. It was more about what he wanted and who he was. So yeah, I find it really interesting that we're particularly in Shakespeare and with the sort of modern productions, is that we do sort of place a lot of importance on whether or not a character is like male identifying or female identifying. And I'm kind of wondering if potentially we are blocking ourselves in that regard.
I had a moment in every single one of my productions where my cast would kind of stop the rehearsal and go, okay, Shelley, we just need to know, are we females playing males, or are we all women, or what are we identifying as? And I always felt really overwhelmed with the question, because I'm like, how do I answer this? Do I make a decision that could then ruin what is going on? Because when you're sitting back and watching it, magic happens. It happens organically. The actor decides whether they want to play it a bit more with a bit more of a feminine string or a bit more of a masculine string. And if I didn't answer them, eventually some of the actors would pull me aside and, like, for example, my Mercutio, like, I actually think that Mercutio is, you know, queer, and that they, you know, they actually identify as a woman. I'm not sure if they're originally a man. And like, they kind of were going down this path of exploration. And yeah, I was really against trying to put a label on it. Like, I would give them the sphere and the world that we were creating. So for example, As You Like It was the traditional way that at the Shakespearean time, we flipped it. Then Macbeth, the Scottish play, we completely flipped it, made it all female pronouns and made it a female post-apocalyptic world. And then in Romeo and Juliet, we had a real mixture. A lot of the older characters were your typical, the same gender that they were, but then the young group in that world, we really played with what gender they were and kind of really stepped away. We kept the pronouns the same that they were in the text, but I assured my actors that I do not want you to feel trapped by that pronoun.
Yeah, value in all of that as well. I don't think that it was right or wrong. I just look, having seen Mark Rylance's theatre company in London, so British Canadian actor who, you know, who's won an Oscar, and we saw an all male version of, I think it was As You Like It as well, and that's what his company.
Is this at the Globe?
At the Globe, yeah. When we were there when it first was rebuilt. And to me, it was fascinating, and it had a place, because when Shakespeare was writing, I don't know that anybody can get away from the fact that I think he was writing female characters, obviously from a male identifying perspective, but to be played by men at the time.
And for his audience to be aware of that too.
Right, exactly. So I think, and he even created characters like Ariel in The Tempest, who were non-binary. So there's all this stuff going on, swapping, and I think there's a place for there to be fully female productions, fully male productions, fully mixed, and everything in between. And there's value in it for everybody. I mean, not in every production, but you know what I'm saying? So I think the idea is to play, like literally play with the play, like you were saying, Shelley. Honestly, I love that you're doing that.
I think with the Globe, though, their aim really was not to explore gender per se. I think that was a byproduct of what their main aim was, which was to explore original practice.
Well, that was what his company's aim. So the Globe hosts a variety of different companies.
Yes,
Mark Rylance's
he
company.
was doing most. He had a lot of control over things in the early days, as I understand, and now they've moved away from the OP original practice focus, and they're doing a lot more kind of diverse, different productions with different casts and different visual designs, but I feel like their aim was a historical reconstruction one at that time, primarily, rather than to explore gender. And I had to do quite a lot of research on this for my PhD, which was in partly historically informed performance in opera. And I think it's really interesting that there seemed to be this fascination for historically informed performance, particularly in the 90s. And maybe early 2000s, and it seems to have passed its peak now. And I personally find it really, really interesting because I'm a history nerd, and I really love to know what it was like to go to the Globe in Shakespeare's time. And I'm really sorry that I never caught one of those OP productions where they, hand sewed all of the costumes and experimented with recreating Shakespeare's the accent of English spoken in Shakespeare's time. And see, to see amazing actors like Mark Rylance play Olivia, I think you can watch that on streaming services now, which is great. But I'm sad that I didn't experience that just from a history point of view.
It was really cold. I froze my butt off, so don't worry about it. You're better to watch it. Much better to watch it.
You'll get the experience.
It did have a flavor of, oh my God, we're back here 300-400 years. But on the other hand, there was still enough modern stuff that you thought, no, we're actually not. You kind of like, like cushions on the seats and stuff like that. And modern lighting they had to use.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And no plague then.
And no plague. And no nuts. They couldn't have nuts they couldn't sell nuts like they used to in the old days because of allergies. So there's little things like that. But it was fascinating watching the men playing women, particularly Mark Rylance. I think that was the one I saw. I can't remember. But and the heavy dresses and everything. And I actually had a doctor tell me, because I had to pull out a production of The Tempest because I got a kidney infection. And while I was in hospital, he told me that basically I had no business performing a modern adaptation, costume-wise. He said, all Shakespeare you can dress. And this was in England when I used to live there. And I just went, there was nothing I could say to change his mind. Not even, are you for real? That didn't work. But I mean, this man wore a bow tie and
it's really fascinating how Shakespeare lovers seem to fall broadly into two camps. People who are obsessed with the text and sort of venerating Shakespeare and the text as this sort of sacred thing and not wanting to change anything. And then people who take completely the opposite approach and want to play with it and rework it and do whatever that they feel that they can do creatively with it to make it speak more clearly to a modern audience. And I think that's so fascinating. And it's very similar to what happens in opera. But I really find that Shakespeare, because he has this kind of almost godlike status in the pantheon of English literary canon, it's almost like a holy text for some people. It's really fascinating.
On the note of the text and modernizing it and seeing it in a modern form, my friend was in the pop-up Globe version of As You Like It when it was in New Zealand, and then I don't know if that one came to Australia. I can't remember, but it was just before I was starting my company, and I'd already decided that I wanted to do As You Like It because of the closing monologue. That really stood out to me. And so when he was in that production, I went, okay, I'm going to do some research. I'm going to go over to Auckland and go see it. And I saw it and I thought it was awesome. Like, it was so fun. Rosalind was hilarious. But because I'd already read the play and I met the actor before I had saw the production, I said to the actor who was playing Touchstone, I can't wait to see you in this. You're hilarious. I love Touchstone. And he went, just, please just forgive me. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool, whatever. And I saw it, and he was great. He was great as Touchstone. But Touchstone, if anyone knows that character, it is a really hard person to play for modern audiences because he's largely inappropriate. And it coming out of a male actor's mouth is difficult to hear. It's really difficult to hear as a female audience member, and I think it's difficult for male audience members as well.
Let no fair be kept in mind, but the fair of Rosalind.
I'll rhyme you so 8 years together. Dinners and suppers and sleeping hours accepted. It is the right butter women's rank to market.
Out, fool.
For a taste. If a heart do lack a hind, let him seek out Rosalind. If the cat will after kind, so be sure will Rosalind. Winter garments must be lined, so must slender Rosalind. They that reap must sheaf and bind, then to cart with Rosalind. Sweetest nut has sourest rind, such a nut is Rosalind. He that sweetest rose will find, must find love's prick and Rosalind.
When I did my production of All Women, I was very aware of that, but I didn't want it to hinder my process. And so I just played with the actor that was playing Touchstone. She was amazing. We just had a lot of fun. She was a new actor. She was mostly had done film in America. So I just got her to really be in her body and be really crass and almost Alakino-like. And audiences were in stitches because having a woman, like, suspending our disbelief, but still also as an audience being aware that that is a female playing a male character, they were in hysterics because they were these really crass, horrible lines about female anatomy, male anatomy, about sex. And it was empowering. And it was finally, it for a modern audience, I think it worked better, us knowing that that was a female actor saying those lines. It was really, really important. And it was a lesson that I learned, that we have to be mindful that some of those jokes, some of those things that are said in Shakespeare's time do not translate that well to modern audiences. Mm-hmm. And there are some audience members who understand that, and they understand the contextual side of where these lines are coming from and that they are 400 years old, and they respect that. But then you have to remember that it just doesn't land sometimes. There's words that he says that you just go, yeah, okay, now in our context, that's not okay. So how do you work around that? Do you remove it? Do you leave it and let your audience hear it and go, yeah, okay, this is a part of history. We need to know that this is the way that people used to speak about different groups or different genders. Or do you play with it and do you have some fun and do you empower the actor and make sure that you pick the right actor to say those lines, to actually say something about where we are now?
Yeah, I think that's really powerful when you can use casting in that way. I suppose for me as a director, for example, when I was directing The Winter's Tale last year, I felt like I needed to, my primary reason for casting some women in male roles was simply to give them opportunities, because there are so few female roles. It wasn't so much that I wanted to make a statement about gender. It was more that I just wanted the girls to have some of the good roles, Yeah. But it depends on the play. I think with As You Like It, it is very much about gender and about sex and romance. And with The Winter's Tale, it is somewhat about gender as well, and misogyny, and the cruel misogyny that Leontes exhibits towards Hermione. But then, of course, the play that everyone always really struggles with on this count is Taming the Shrew. And I think that Camille, you were talking about Taming the Shrew recently and how it's really, can be really difficult to watch now.
Yeah, I had a really hard time. I did not work on that production, so I was strictly an audience member, and I know most of the actors who were in it, and to hear some of those lines come from somebody that I know is, not a right misogynistic bastard, can be really jarring and really tough. And when we discussed it afterwards, he had a completely different view of what he was doing than what I did. His view was, I'm being teachable. I'm using a teachable moment, and I'm being, as silly and as outrageous as I possibly can be, and did not see it as an abusive situation. Whereas, as a woman who's experienced that sort of thing and have had friends experience it, it's very jarring, and it's very much a slap in the face, and it takes you very much out of the production, and I can see where people might have flashbacks or have an episode where they're taken back and be triggered to their own feelings of, or their own experiences of abuse. So that is a really, really, really hard one. And I think it really needs to be handled with a very deft hand. I would never say don't ever perform it. But I think it needs a very deft touch in terms of how you manage, the abuse, if you will, throughout, and try to, make Petruchio not the evil character and not the bad guy. Because I really don't think that was Shakespeare's intention with this character. I don't think he was meant to be. I think it was, it was supposed to be a playful playoff of each other, these two incredibly strong characters. And very, very how do I put it? Like very strong within themselves. Like they're very, very, solid and very identified and very sort of set in their ways, if you will, to try to learn how to bounce off each other and create a functional sort of relationship. But given the times and given the circumstances, that one is abusive. And I mean, Katerina is not exactly the nicest human being either. If you take a look at how she treats her sister, for example. So it's hard, and trying to figure out how to do that byplay and that interplay is really, really, I think is really, really tricky. And I think that's going to be a challenge for that particular play going forward, is how do we play with these roles? How do we, without softening it, without, losing the intent, how do we deal with these roles?
Come, you wasp, Faith. You're too angry.
If I be waspish, best beware my sting.
My remedy then is to pluck it out.
Aye, if the fool could find it where it lies.
Who knows not where a wasp does wear his sting? In his tail?
In his tongue.
Whose tongue?
Yours, if you talk of tails. And so farewell.
What, with my tongue in your tail? Oh, nay, come again, good Kate. I'm a gentleman.
That I'll try.
Whoa, I swear I'll cuff you.
So may you lose your arms. If you strike me, you are no gentleman. And if no gentleman, why then no arms.
A herald, Kate? Oh, put me in thy books.
What is your crest? A cock's comb?
A combless cock.
Yeah, and my understanding from what the director Tom Peach did with that last year when we did the stage reading was that he wasn't shying away from how abusive it was, and he was presenting it in all its ugliness. And the visual design for the promotions was, grey, deserted landscapes with barbed wire, to reflect how she is a prisoner in this marriage. And certainly, for me, I wouldn't say triggering, but certainly reminded me of some of the more abusive relationships that I've been in the past. And I think that in the post-Me Too era, it's become incredibly clear, especially since COVID started and domestic abuse has increased. It's become very, very clear that coercive control probably needs to be criminalized, and it's what leads to like physical violence and financial violence and all these more severe or more problematic types of controlling behavior in domestic environments. I think, yeah. I mean, obviously the Me Too movement has really put a really amazing bomb into the entire theatrical and film and TV industries, which is, from a female point of view, is fantastic, generally speaking. I was really interested to rewatch the old 1967 Franco Zeffirelli version of the film of Taming the Shrew with Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, and to see how in that period where they were really exploring what women's lib could mean in the context of the sexual revolution, where somehow, in the early 60s, because of the pill, sex was seen as this, whole exciting new world, but it was still very much a patriarchal view of it. It was women were seen through the male gaze very much. And how over-sexualized Elizabeth Taylor is in that film, and how their actual relationship in the real world, which was seen as stormy and tempestuous and sexy, translated onto the screen, and how that abuse, what we would see now as an abusive relationship, is portrayed in more of what you say, Camille, that kind of possibly the original intention of being this sort of scrappy way of two very strong and rather unlikable characters falling in love and learning to live with each other.
Like I said, it was supposed to be like an interplay, like a playful sort of thing was I believe the original intent, but it's just not now.
Sorry, did anybody see the Shirley Henderson version that was done about 10, 15 years ago? I think it was BBC. It may have been Channel 4. I can't remember.
Yeah, I did see that actually.
Oh, I thought they did exactly that well, where they made it about two really messed up people from opposite ends of the spectrums. And his cruelties sort of were justified. I still think it has its problems, but that was the best rendition I saw it in terms of what you're saying, Camille. And they both ended up just sort of as ugly as they started, but they came to a mutual understanding. And then they made everybody else around them look stupid because they had such a good relationship. And I thought that was a fascinating take on that. And I love it. To date, it's my favorite production.
Yeah, the production that I saw was the Royal Julia Meryl Streep one in Central Park. Which that was it's on YouTube, and I believe it's on YouTube.
Most of it,
and that's also what they tried to do, is try to make it, two really strong characters butting heads at loggerheads, trying to figure out how to live together, how to love each other, quite frankly, without losing themselves. And losing, sort of the fun of sparring and the fun of this sort of wordplay that they had, and these interchanges that they had back and forth. And that final scene where, it appears that Katrina is being all submissive, where no, she's not. She's teasing him right back and going toe to toe with him. That was a good take, and everybody else is taking it seriously, and they're not being serious, and everybody else looks ridiculous at the end of it.
And honestly, if I'm going to say something controversial, are we all sitting down? Good. I think that historically, partnerships between men and women in a family setting, a lot of the time, women are more dominant than made out by past patriarchy. Like they can say what they want, man's in charge and everything. And even in the 90s, the early 90s, when I got married, the women were still being called to obey. I know that's still a thing today, but I think historically there just isn't the justification of, women not being in charge. They're just sort of rolling their eyes in the background going, you can play at that, but we know we are. And I feel that Taming of the Shrew could leverage sort of the reality of a lot of those situations. Is that clear, or am I just kind of waffling on?
You're reminding me of a scene from My Big Fat Greek Wedding, where you know what I'm talking about? The man is the head of the household. Yes, but the woman is the neck, and she's the one who points him where she wants him to go. And that was, to me, being a newlywed when that came out, it's like, oh, okay, I can do this. Not that my marriage is particularly traditional in that sense, but it sort of gave me this sort of extra sort of boost of power. So I totally hear what you're saying, Barbara, about sort of the hidden power of women that, is sort of whitewashed, if you will, by patriarchy.
Yeah.
And actually within a religious setting, because at the time I was religious, the people in charge of our religion held up Taming of the Shrews. See, that's what happens when you're headstrong. You got to be beaten down by a man. And they held it up as something that, don't be like Kat, don't be like Katerina, because it'll be your downfall, which is just ludicrous to me. Yeah.
That's amazing. I really had fun when we got married early this year. In our vows, because I deliberately got the marriage celebrant, who was also a performer in a previous life, to start to say, I promise to love, honor, and obey. And I was supposed to repeat after her. And I instead would plan this out in advance, but a lot of people thought that it was just spur of the moment thing, that I would take the mic off her and ask the entire audience of women to put their hand up if they obeyed their husband. If they always obeyed their husband, and so no one put their hand up. And I said, yeah, so that's what I thought. And I handed the mic back to her and I said, let's just skip that part.
Yeah, it was one of the funnier moments. Yeah.
I said, I won't obey. I know I won't obey. Let's just admit it.
Yeah, but I mean, I suppose as a performer, I could approach that in a performative way. And I sort of always saw the whole wedding as a performance anyway, whereas a lot of people see it very much as this sort of sacred ritual. To me, it wasn't really sacred. It was just something that we could play with and have fun with in a creative way.
Good.
Amber, you were talking before about how you were saying that you think that Shakespeare in some sense writes more rich female characters than we do now.
Yeah, so I think that one thing that I find really interesting about a lot of Shakespeare's women is that they are very sort of headstrong and they have a lot of opinions and they sort of do kind of just do their own thing. And I think that in the modern world, we make sort of a really big deal about that, whereas Shakespeare kind of was like, oh no, that's just how they are, like that's just what their character is. Whereas now it's sort of like a plot point for sort of modern writers and modern storytelling, that like, oh, this character is like really bossy and she's like really controlling and she's got all of these opinions, which I think is a little bit sad in the sense that as modern audiences, that's all we sort of focus on with a character. We never really get the opportunity to explore those other complexities that women have. Women just aren't, they can be bossy and they can be bossy and they can be assertive and they can have a lot of opinions, but that's only sort of one side of who they are. And I think that Shakespeare potentially does a little bit of a better job at looking at the other aspects, whereas I think that we neglect to even think about those other aspects in sort of more modern works.
So it's like a backlash. Feminism has actually created problems in some sense in the way we write women now, maybe.
Or it's simply feminism through the male gaze, whereas, the industry is still predominantly male. And this is what they think women want to see of themselves. And this is what they think how women want to be portrayed. And they're sort of losing the full roundness of the character, whereas they're just focusing, it's like, she needs to be strong. That they're not leaving room for, the vulnerabilities or the foibles, if you will. That all women have.
I think it's starting to shift though. I mean, I certainly see that with, Disney princesses, for example. There was this whole period through the 90s and noughties where the girls had to be strong, and that was their main thing, that they were strong and headstrong and did their own thing. And it was moving away from this idea that they needed a prince to save them. But I think I'm starting to see a little shift there where they're actually starting to say, okay, maybe we don't need a prince, not even to save us, but maybe we don't need a prince at all. Maybe we don't even need a love interest, or maybe the love, they're exploring different types of love, like with Frozen, where it's sisterly love that saves the day. And then, this idea that women can be complex and vulnerable and need help in some sense, but also be strong at the same time. I think I can see a shift. I mean, Disney is only one part of the Hollywood machine, but I think it's a very strong indicator of trends because they really get a lot of feedback from their fans. And you can see that how the feedback's changing the way they do things.
Did anyone get a chance to see Come From Away?
Yes.
Yeah.
Love Come From Away.
Yeah. I loved the story. There's a story of the female pilot who lands in this small town. But there's a point in the story where they go then back through her story about her career. And I think that we just, as well, we have to remember how long it has been a man's world and we have to be patient. Like I remember there was at one point Sydney Theatre Company got a real rap because, they didn't have enough plays being put on that were written by women. And it's like, yeah, well, when we look at the percentage of plays that are written by women and then we go look at those plays and look at what's quality because, it does take time to create quality. Yeah, they probably are going to be majority male written plays. Like, unfortunately, that's just the way it is. It's great that we're aware of it, but let's not ridicule each other because it is going to take time. I think if we're aware of it and we're learning and we're testing it and we're failing and trying again is absolutely fine. But I think to have an idea of, okay, we've done Me Too, the world should be different now, is just a ridiculous way to be. I think we need to give it some time. I think that the Me Too has also had some negative implications for women on set and on stage. I think that men who have done the right thing the whole time have now, pulled back in their roles, especially when it comes to intimacy, which then now is like, I know as a female actor, I had a moment on stage where there was a kiss and I wasn't getting anything from the male actor because I'm sure he was too scared to push that boundary or to seem like he is making me feel uncomfortable, which thus made it really uncomfortable because it was making me do all the work. So on a side note, everyone needs to have intimacy coordination. That's something that now I will never, ever, ever not do. It is so valid. It is so important. I did it for Romeo and Juliet, and it is about storytelling, and you need to make sure that you as a director, you as a stage manager, and you as a cast all understand that and have conversations around it. I think even in school productions, it's ridiculous that if there's a kiss, they just let it happen rather than having a conversation around it.
Yeah. My first kiss ever was in a school production, and I look back on what happened now, and I think that wasn't very good what the director did.
I can think about myself as a high school musical director where once there was 3 couples in this play and they all kissed, and I just left it because I expected that they weren't going to do it, and then they all ran up to me on opening night saying, "We all did the kiss, we just did it," and I'm like, how did I let this happen? Now, especially doing the intimacy coordination workshop, I think I can't believe that I let that happen, but we all have to just learn and keep learning.
But I would contend that I think, though there's awareness, I think we still do have to keep reminding people, because just recently somebody very kindly wrote a role for me in a film that's supposed to be shot later this year, early next year. And when I said, well, you're going to need an intimacy coordinator for that, to the writer-director, he gaslit me and laughed at me to this day. And that happens more frequently than we'd like, I think. So I think we do need to be vigilant. And even, people have done productions of Shakespeare where there's a lot more intimacy than was ever written. And especially in something like A Midsummer Night's Dream, there have been things that have pushed the envelope. And so, intimacy coordinators and, being clear about things and clear about our messages as actors and directors when we're on stage too, I think is a good thing.
I think the encouraging of discussing boundaries within a performance is incredibly important as well. So that everybody knows what lines they can push, what lines they absolutely cannot cross. And that sort of thing. And I guess that's what an intimacy coordinator does is sort of walk you through that sort of process so that your cast is comfortable.
I found it interesting as a director at some points when I've directed older men in particular, but just in general, people who are more experienced than me. I've found it sometimes difficult to assert myself in the way that I should as a director and take charge of the situation and try and make sure that everyone is feeling comfortable, not just the people who I look up to, and not letting them kind of run the show. And I think that as there are more and more women directors and as women directors get more experience, I certainly feel as I'm getting more experienced, I'm getting more comfortable with, being in that position of I am actually the one in charge here. And it's my responsibility and my right to direct things how I see fit and not let people who I see as more experienced walk all over me. And as we see more female directors, it becomes easier to do that.
I think also as a technical director for Stream Shakespeare and like learning how to do all of this techie computer stuff, like there's been times where I've like had to put my foot down and be like, we cannot physically do this because I don't have enough brain cells to make it work. Like there's so many times that thank you, Holly, for letting me be like learning and like making myself, because it's also hard because as a stage manager / tech and the youngest person in the entire company, it's like I'm running the show, I'm doing all the tech, and I'm like the youngest and like most, and sometimes it's quite funny to see like the dynamics being like, yes, I am telling people what to do, and there's like people that are much older than me being like, okay, and I'm like, okay.
But isn't that fun?
It is.
Like, isn't that a great position and a great feeling? It's like all these people who have all this experience and they're listening to me.
It is fun, but it is. You do feel the responsibility as well.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Definitely.
But personally, I see somebody like you, and I know that we've only done one production together, but I was just delighted that you were there. And I just went, yes, female techie, yeah, let's support her, let's mentor her. I loved it. And I think that's part of, as we discussed earlier, women supporting women.
And it's sometimes hard to find those people in the tech industry, like Amber was saying, because they're just so sparse. Like you'll be the only girl in the crew for like multiple shows.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. It's, I mean, not like, this may sound a bit weird, but like I kind of don't mind it because I kind of just get on and do things. Like when I started at the recital hall down at Angel Place, and I loved working there. It was so much fun because they didn't treat me any differently. They just chucked me in the crew and let me go and do whatever I wanted to do. They had no they let me experience everything. And I think that's really important, that like in the crew, you don't treat people like females in the crew differently. You just make sure that they're included and part of it. Like it's going to take ages before there's like female, like full female crews. Like seeing it more slightly, but like there's always going to be, majority of them are male, and it's going to take a while. So like it's important to sort of have them part of it and not sort of isolated, because sometimes that can happen, being like young and female and in tech, which is like male dominated completely.
I think that you, Shelley, you're right. We do need to have patience, but we also need to balance that with drive and ambition and continually push for our rights and our development. But also, to recognize that we're not always going to get what we want, and certainly not while the world is still very much a man's world. And social change takes time.
And I would add to that. I would add to that we need money.
We need
money to pay for development. We need money to pay for resources. I realize I believe it was Virginia Woolf in A Room of Her Own. that she said, women need money so that they can have what they need. So that's something else that I think we need to also start pushing for is to get more funding for these types of things, and for things that push the envelope, like She Shakespeare or what have you, that supports women.
Yeah.
Equal pay, dare I say?
What was it? The writers that shoot, I'm having an issue with names today.
Do you guys want to hear an interesting fact
writers,
about equal pay?
Sure.
I learned this the other day, so completely different, but still the same. Talking about sport, Wimbledon, the female and male winners now get equal prize money, yay. But the winner of the wheelchair tennis of Wimbledon, so our Dylan Alcott, got the same prize money if you come last in Wimbledon. His prize money is the same money if you don't win one single game. That's what someone told me. Now, I can't quote it exactly because it's through word of mouth, but, I think this also comes back to that we have to remember that there are lots of fights being fought at the moment for equal opportunity, and also to remember that we can't fight all of them. I've had a lot of ridicule and people asking me, well, what are you doing for this? And what about this? And I've learnt along the way as well of, yes, I agree, I need to be doing more for different things. But we're only one person, and we're only one person who is usually self-funded. So let's all just give each other a break.
Yeah, don't fall prey to whataboutism.
Yeah. And that's people's argument against intersectionalism in terms of feminism is but what about? It's like, what, I can care for multiple things, but I'm, like you said, I'm one person. I only have enough energy, and I'm choosing to tackle this.
Yeah.
And hopefully that will inspire somebody to tackle their particular issue within their lane, if you will. You got to remember, you're not only tackling an issue, you're also serving as an example. And that can be as powerful as dealing with a particular issue.
And that was interesting for me when I was setting this roundtable up for today. I was thinking, should we only talk about women and people who identify as women and specifically female issues, or should we include people who are trans, feminine, LGBT issues, that kind of thing? And eventually I decided we will do another roundtable, which is purely about queer issues. And I think we better wrap it up now because we're pretty much at time. But speaking about funding, if anyone has enjoyed our program today and would like to give us a little bit of moolah, please head over to our website, which Camille has beautifully set up on Raisely at www.streamshakespeare.com. Were there any final closing comments that any of you ladies like to make?
Let's just do more Shakespeare.
With more women in it.
With more women in it.
Yeah.
And more money.
I'll send you an email, Shelley.
My message is to just everyone be safe, and don't forget that, especially in these times, the arts is what keeps us going. We need art, we need music, we need theatre, we need film in our worlds. Let's knock on our government's door and say, hey, do not forget about us. And even our schools. Oh my goodness. Drama is so important. Drama, music, art, photography, all of that stuff is so important for everyone to have in their lives. And that's all I hope for with my part in this world, is that I can teach people around me to just be a little bit creative and find that creative side of yourself.
Yeah. And one of the main reasons why I set up Stream Shakespeare was so that we could really network and we could explore the wonderful community of creative people we have, not only in Sydney, but all around the world, who are just ready and waiting to do fun projects and explore issues such as the ones we've talked about today.